The American West is often remembered through myth, dusty streets, fast draws, lone gunmen staring each other down at high noon. But most real violence did not look like that. It didn't happen in dramatic silence before a duel. It happened in confusion, in fear, in rumor, in collective panic. And sometimes it happened in open fields, under a clear blue sky. In the summer of 1857, a wagon train known as the Baker-Fancher Party left Arkansas for California. The group consisted of roughly 140 people, entire families traveling. Together, farmers, craftsmen, children, elderly grandparents. They carried livestock, tools, household goods, rifles for protection, and enough supplies to cross the desert. They were not looking for conflict. They were looking for opportunity, but timing can turn ordinary journeys into fatal ones. At that exact moment, the Utah Territory was in a state of escalating paranoia. The United States government had appointed a new territorial governor to replace Brigham Young, federal. Troops were preparing to march west to enforce authority. This confrontation would later be called the Utah War. To the Mormon settlers of Utah, the incoming army was not simply a political transition. It was a threat. They remembered Missouri. They remembered Illinois. They remembered expulsion, persecution, violence. The idea of federal troops entering their territory revived old trauma. Leadership encouraged defensive preparation. Militia units were mobilized. Communications spread quickly through sermons and town meetings. Outsiders could not be trusted. Into this atmosphere rode the Baker-Fancher wagon train. As they passed through settlements in southern Utah, small disputes allegedly occurred. Some later accounts claim members of the wagon train insulted local leaders or bragged about participating in earlier anti-Mormon violence. Other reports accuse them of poisoning wells. There is no reliable evidence supporting most of these claims. But facts are rarely required when fear is active. Rumors do not need proof. They need repetition. By early September, the wagon train reached Mountain Meadows, a lush valley surrounded by hills, an ideal resting point before entering harsher desert terrain. They camped. They let cattle graze. Children likely ran through the grass, unaware of what tension surrounded them. On September 7th, gunfire erupted from the hills. Militia members, some reportedly disguised to resemble native attackers, opened fire. The emigrants reacted quickly. They circled their wagons into a defensive formation and returned fire. The first assault did not wipe them out. Instead, a siege began. For 5 days, the attackers maintained pressure. Sharpshooters positioned themselves at elevation. Water access was cut off. Attempts to break out were met with gunfire. Inside the wagon circle, stress escalated. The wounded accumulated. Food and water dwindled. Temperatures were high. The psychological weight became immense. Imagine the soundscape: crying children, gunshots echoing through hills, men arguing about options, women tending wounds with limited supplies, the smell of blood mixing with dry grass. Outside the circle, militia leaders debated next steps. Letting the emigrants escape was considered dangerous. If survivors reached California, stories would spread. Federal authorities might investigate. In a territory already bracing for military confrontation, that risk felt intolerable. A catastrophic decision formed. On September 11th, a white flag was raised. Militia representatives approached under truce. They proposed surrender terms. Lay down your weapons. We will escort you safely to nearby settlements. You will be protected. Trust us. After 5 days of siege, dehydration, and mounting casualties, the offer may have seemed like the only path to survival. The emigrants agreed. The surrender process was methodical. Weapons were collected. The youngest children and the wounded were loaded into wagons. Women and older children followed on foot. The adult men walked last, each accompanied by an armed militia member. They moved in a slow column across the meadow. It was quiet. Too quiet. Then a signal was given. Accounts differ on the exact cue. Some describe a shouted phrase. But what followed is consistent across testimonies. The escorts turned and shot the unarmed men at close range. Simultaneously, other militia members emerged and opened fire on the women and older children. Some victims attempted to flee. Few made it far. Within minutes, the meadow became a killing field. Approximately 120 people were dead. 17 children under the age of 7 survived. Why? Because they were deemed too young to provide coherent testimony. The aftermath was grim. Bodies were stripped of valuables. Livestock was divided. Possessions were redistributed. The dead were left exposed to the elements. Over time, animals scattered remains across the valley. When news began to spread months later, official narratives blamed native tribes. Responsibility was deflected. Silence was encouraged. Years passed. Federal investigations stalled, complicated by political sensitivities and regional tensions. Eventually, pressure mounted. John D. Lee, a local militia leader present at the massacre, was arrested. His first trial in 1875 ended in a hung jury. His second trial in 1876 resulted in conviction. In 1877, he was executed by firing squad at Mountain Meadows itself. Before his death, he claimed he had acted under orders and that higher authorities were protecting themselves. Whether entirely true or partially self-serving, historians generally agree that responsibility was broader than one individual. Collective decisions had been made. The massacre left deep scars. For decades, it remained a point of tension between communities and historians. Memorial markers were erected, removed, rebuilt. Interpretations shifted, but the core reality remains unchanged. A surrendered group was systematically killed under the promise of protection. The Mountain Meadows Massacre challenges the mythology of the West. It was not about quick draws. It was not about outlaw charisma. It was about fear amplified by isolation. It was about how communities, under perceived threat, can rationalize irreversible acts. In wide-open landscapes, violence can feel distant. But geography does not prevent moral collapse. If anything, distance from oversight can accelerate it. Today, the meadow looks serene. Grass grows evenly. Wind moves quietly through the valley. Visitors might stand there and feel nothing unusual. But history does not vanish because land appears peaceful. It lingers. The American frontier was built on ambition, survival, resilience, but it was also shaped by panic, rumor, and collective brutality. And sometimes, the most disturbing violence is not the act of a lone outlaw. It is the act of a community convinced it is defending itself. Because when fear becomes justification, almost anything becomes possible.